I was standing there with a glass of water in my hand, trying to look like I belonged in that room. My name is Eleanor Hart. I'm 70 years old, and for most of my life, people have mistaken my quietness for weakness. But nothing prepared me for the moment my own daughter-in-law turned toward me in that crowded Chicago restaurant and raised her voice like I was some kind of unwelcome guest. Eleanor, if you're desperate to stay, go eat with the cleaning staff in the service hallway. That's where you fit. The laughter around her table wasn't loud, but I felt every whisper scrape against my skin. I saw a few forks freeze mid-air. Someone pretended not to hear, and my son, Nathan, stood beside her with his hand resting on the back of her chair, staring at his phone like none of it involved him, like I wasn't the woman who raised him, fed him, and saved him more times than I can count. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard her. But then Haley tilted her head, smirking, waiting to see how far she could push me. The lights were soft, the linen white, the air cold, and somehow I felt 70 years of my life folding in on me in one crushing moment. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply breathed in, felt the sting settle deep, and realized right there between the champagne glasses and the stairs that something inside me had finally snapped. I didn't rush out of the restaurant. I didn't want my exit to look like an escape, even though my heart was pounding in a way I hadn't felt in years. Instead, I walked slowly, one measured step after another, letting the cool, polished floor stretch beneath my feet. Each reflection from the chandelier glimmered across the wood like it was tracking my thoughts, sharp, fractured, painfully clear. My palms were still damp from gripping the glass I'd left behind on the table. I could almost hear the faint clink it made when I set it down a little too firmly, that tiny sound swallowed by the music and the low hum of conversation. I knew people were watching me as I left the room, but for once, I didn't lower my gaze or pretend not to notice. I had spent too many years pretending things didn't hurt when they did. The hostess glanced toward me as I stepped into the foyer, her face softening in a way that suggested she had heard what happened. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. There are moments in life when strangers show more humanity than the people who share your blood. I gave her the smallest nod as I passed, acknowledging a kindness, even if it was only in her eyes. Outside, the cold Chicago air wrapped around me the moment the door swung shut behind me. I inhaled deeply, letting the cold sting my lungs. Oddly, it steadied me. The night was glossy with a thin sheen of rain, and the city lights reflected across the pavement like someone had scattered broken glass across the street. Cars hissed by, tires slicing through shallow puddles, and every sound felt louder now that I was out of that suffocating room. I stepped beneath the awning and folded my arms, not out of fear or shame, but to hold myself still. My throat was tight, but I wasn't choking on the humiliation. Not exactly. The real weight came from the realization that the line between love and blindness can become invisible if you stand still too long. For years, I had chosen blindness because I thought it meant holding my family together. Tonight, someone else chose to rip the veil off for me. The valet looked up from his podium and gave me a polite nod of recognition. He stepped forward, ready to fetch my car, but I shook my head. "Not yet," I said softly. My voice didn't waver, though inside my ribs felt fragile, as if one wrong breath might crack them. I reached into my coat pocket for my phone. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from something sharper, something that had been dormant inside me for too long. I scrolled past the familiar names and went straight to the one I needed. When I tapped it, I already knew exactly what I was going to say. I had rehearsed this moment so many times in my mind without admitting it to myself. Alden Pierce, my attorney for more than 2 decades, answered on the second ring. His voice was warm, calm, and steady. The same voice that had guided me through my husband's death, the expansion of my company, and more difficult legal conversations than I care to count. "Eleanor?" he said. "Is everything all right?" I stared at my reflection in the restaurant's darkened windows. My hair, neatly pinned back only an hour ago, now fell in a few loose strands. My eyes looked tired, but behind that tiredness was something unfamiliar. Resolve. "Alden," I said, "it's time. Activate the exit plan." There was a silence so deep I could hear the wind brushing the awning above me. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked, his voice lower now. "There's no reversing this once we begin. It's permanent." I let my gaze drift back toward the restaurant. Through the glass doors, I could still make out the blurred movement of guests inside. I saw a figure that looked like Haley, poised, smiling, enjoying the attention she seemed to crave more than oxygen. I saw another figure, my son, standing close to her, but not close enough to be truly present. I wondered how long it had been since he'd looked at me the way a son should look at his mother. "I'm certain," I said. "More certain than I've been about anything in years." Alden exhaled softly, but I could hear the unspoken meaning behind it. He had been waiting for this call. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this abruptly, but he knew it would come eventually. It always does when a mother's heart is worn thin by years of giving without receiving. "I'll start the process now," he said. "I'll call you back within the hour." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I stood there for a moment, listening to the city, letting the cold settle into my bones. But the cold didn't bother me. It almost felt like a cleansing, like the night air was washing away all the doubts I had carried for so long. Finally, I walked toward my car. My shoes clicked softly against the concrete, each step grounding me more than the last. When I reached the door handle, I didn't get in immediately. I rested my hand on the metal, feeling its chill seep into my skin. Up until tonight, I had always seen myself as someone who endured, someone who swallowed pain quietly and kept moving. I had convinced myself that silent endurance was the same as strength. But as I stood there beneath the streetlight, watching the faint steam of my breath drift into the air, I realized strength sometimes looks like letting go, completely, irrevocably, without apology. I finally opened the door and sank into the driver's seat. The interior smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet I kept in the console. Something about that familiar scent calmed me, but it didn't erase the ache in my chest. It only made it easier to breathe through it. When my phone buzzed with new incoming messages, I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to see the words to know what they would say. The night had already shifted. My life had already shifted. And though I didn't know exactly what would come next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no going back. When I pulled into the small parking lot of my apartment building that night, the world felt strangely quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath with me. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, refusing to turn off the engine. My fingers rested on the steering wheel, stiff and cold. But it wasn't the weather that made them shake. It was the weight of everything I'd carried for years, every check I'd written, every bill I'd paid, every moment I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of keeping my son afloat. The dashboard clock blinked 11:07. That was when the first message came through, then another, then 10 more. My phone lit up like a fire alarm buzzing across the console, vibrating violently as if the device itself understood the panic happening on the other end. I didn't pick it up. I just listened as each vibration stacked on top of the next, forming a frantic rhythm that filled the car's silence. I knew exactly what the messages were about. the restaurant bill, the corporate card. The fact that, for the first time in his adult life, my son had been forced to face the world without my money padding his fall. I finally turned off the engine, grabbed my coat, and stepped into the cold hallway. My footsteps echoed across the old linoleum floor as I unlocked my door and let the familiar smell of lavender and old wood envelope me. This apartment had held every version of me: Eleanor the worker, the widow, the mother, the woman who patched up everyone else's life but never tended to her own. I set my keys on the table, and just as I reached for the kettle, the knocking began. Not knocking, pounding. "Mom!" Nathan's voice tore through the hallway, raw and furious. "Open the door! Now!" His fist hit the wood so hard the frame shook. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the air settle into my lungs. I had known this confrontation would come eventually, but not even clarity could steal me completely for the sound of my child demanding entry like a stranger collecting a debt. I opened the door. Nathan stumbled inside, his face red, his breath sharp with the bitterness of someone who had been drinking far too quickly. His tie was loose, hair messy, eyes wild with indignation. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted before the door even clicked shut behind him. "Do you have any idea how humiliated we were? People at the restaurant were whispering, Mom, the bill was declined. Declined, because you turned off the card." I stepped aside, letting him pace through the living room like a storm trapped in a small box. He raked his hands through his hair, pulling at it, frustration radiating off him like heat. "I told you," I said quietly. "I will not fund celebrations where I am treated like an inconvenience." He spun toward me so fast the motion startled me. "It was a joke. Haley was joking. You're always so sensitive, always taking things personally. Why can't you just get over things like a normal person?" A laugh, not of humor but disbelief, escaped me before I could stop it. A normal person doesn't get told to eat in a service hallway. Nathan, not by their own daughter-in-law, not in public, and certainly not at the event they paid for. He waved his hand as if swatting away my words. "You're exaggerating. You always do. The point is, you should have handled it privately, not sabotaged the whole night." "Sabotaged?" I repeated softly. "No. Sabotage is what happens when someone intends to cause harm. What I did was refuse to continue being humiliated." That was when he saw the envelope on the table. His eyes narrowed. "What's that?" I picked it up slowly and held it toward him. He snatched it from my hand and slid out the documents inside. I watched the color drain from his face as he scanned the pages. "This is a sale agreement." His voice trembled. "You sold the company? Tonight? You sold Northbridge Textiles without telling me?" "I told the only person whose business it was to know," I said. "My attorney." "You can't do this," he shouted. "That company was supposed to be mine one day. Everything you built, it was supposed to come to me." His words struck harder than any insult could, not because they were new, but because they revealed what had been true all along. In his eyes, my life's work had never belonged to me. It was simply waiting for him. "I built that company," I said. "I sacrificed for it. I sacrificed for you. But I will no longer sacrifice my dignity." He slammed the papers onto the table, his chest heaving. "You're insane. You're actually losing your mind. I'll get a lawyer. I'll have you evaluated. You can't just cut me off, Mom. I'm your son." "And that," I whispered, "is the one thing you've forgotten how to be." For a moment, he just stared at me. Rage, disbelief, and something like fear flickering in his eyes. Then he stormed toward the door, slamming it so hard the walls shook. I didn't chase him. I didn't call his name. I simply locked the door, walked back to the kitchen, and poured the tea I had been intending to make before he arrived. For the first time in many years, The quiet that filled my home felt like something sacred, something earned, something mine. The morning light came in softer than usual, spilling across the tile floor in long, honey-colored stripes. I stood in the kitchen with a steaming cup of tea cupped between my hands, trying to ground myself in the warmth of it. There was something almost forgiving about the early light, gentle, unhurried, as if the world had decided to give me a small reprieve after the storm of the night before. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nathan's face twisted with anger and disbelief. I heard his voice echoing, accusing, demanding, desperate. I had spent a lifetime soothing those storms, bending my spine and softening my voice just to keep the peace. But now the echoes washed over me without dragging me down. I had made my choice. I wasn't going back. My phone, resting on the table, buzzed again. Dozens of notifications cluttered the screen, missed calls, voicemails, long messages filled with frantic words and exclamation points I didn't need to open to understand. They were from Nathan, from numbers I recognized as Haley's friends, even from her mother. Not one of them asked if I was all right. Not one of them asked what had led to the decisions I made. I had just turned the phone face down when a new message flashed across the screen. "Grandma, are you home? I'm on my way." It was from Leah. The breath I released surprised me. It trembled with relief I hadn't realized I was holding on to. I replied with a simple yes. And before I could even finish my tea, there was a soft, hurried knock at my door. When I opened it, Leah didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside and wrapped her arms around me, pressing her cheek against my shoulder in a way that made my throat tighten. There was no hesitation in her embrace, no calculation, no expectation, just genuine concern, something I had nearly forgotten how to recognize. "I heard everything," she said, her voice breaking around the edges. "Dad was yelling when he got home. Mom was screaming. They were both blaming you for everything, and I couldn't stay there. I couldn't listen to it." The warmth of her hug lingered on my skin even after she pulled back. She stood there in my small living room with her backpack slung over one shoulder, looking younger than her 21 years and yet wiser than both her parents combined. "You shouldn't have had to leave your home because of them," I said gently. "It's not a home anymore," she whispered. "It's just a place where people shout." She moved deeper into the apartment, running her fingers over the framed photos lining the wall, pictures of Nathan when he was small, the rare few of all three of us before things grew complicated, and a handful from the early days of my business, when survival meant sleepless nights and hope meant one more contract coming through. Leah touched one photo in particular, Nathan at 10 years old, missing 2 front teeth, beaming proudly as he held up a science fair ribbon. "He used to smile like that at you," she said softly. "Yes," I replied. "He did." She turned back to me. "Grandma, what happened last night?" So I told her. Not every detail, not the way the humiliation felt like it clung to my ribs, not the sting of watching Nathan remain silent when Haley degraded me, but enough. Enough for her to understand that I had reached a point where staying quiet would have cost me the last pieces of myself. When I finished, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten breakfast alone for years. Her hands curled around her mug as she took in every word with a seriousness far beyond her age. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "Maybe the hardest thing, but the right thing. People who love you shouldn't treat you like a burden, and people who depend on you shouldn't punish you the moment you stop giving." Her words hit me harder than any accusation Nathan had thrown at me. For a moment, I had to look away, blinking against the sudden sting in my eyes. I wasn't used to being defended. I certainly wasn't used to being understood. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're a good girl, Leah. A good woman. Your parents should be proud of you." She laughed, but it was a sad, small sound. They never notice. I've tried for years to get them to see what matters. They only care about appearances, about what people think, about money we don't even have. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some truths sit so heavily in the air that voicing them only makes the room colder. Leah rose from her chair, wandered down the hallway, and paused at the door to the spare bedroom. "Can I stay here?" she asked without turning around. "Just for a while. I don't want to go back." "Of course you can," I said. "This is your home as much as mine." She stepped inside, setting her backpack down gently on the quilt I'd sewn by hand decades ago. There was something tender in the way she touched the fabric, as if she could feel the years stitched into it. As I watched her, a realization settled over me, not with shock, but with a quiet, aching relief. I had not lost everything last night. I had not even lost most things. I had simply shed the illusions that had weighed me down, and in their place was something real, someone real standing in my hallway unpacking her clothes, choosing me not because she needed anything, but because she cared. As the kettle clicked off behind me, filling the silence with a soft hiss, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. A small, stubborn kind of hope. The kind that grows in the cracks of a broken heart and refuses to die. Months passed in a rhythm I hadn't known before. Quiet mornings, slow cups of coffee on my porch, evenings spent listening to the wind instead of waiting for a phone to ring with someone else's crisis. My life, once consumed by the needs of people who rarely asked about mine, began to feel like something I actually lived in rather than survived. The house in Oregon became a kind of sanctuary. The tall pines stood like patient guards, and the air always smelled faintly of earth after the rain. Leah visited often, her laughter filling the rooms in a way I had almost forgotten laughter could. She brought her textbooks, her nursing scrubs, stories about patients who touched her heart, and sometimes she brought silence, an easy, comfortable kind of silence I cherished more than any conversation. One late afternoon, while I was trimming the hydrangeas in the yard, I heard a hesitant knock on the front door. When I looked up, Nathan stood there holding a bouquet of small roadside wildflowers. They were uneven, a little wilted around the edges, but they were real, more real than any of the expensive arrangements he used to send on holidays out of obligation rather than affection. "Mom," he said softly, "I just wanted to tell you, I'm trying, I'm working. I'm finally understanding things I should have understood years ago." He looked older, not in a tired way, but in a human way. There was humility in his eyes I had never seen before, not the desperation from the night everything fell apart, but the quiet acceptance of a man who had finally met himself honestly. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. I simply stepped close enough to touch one of the flowers and nodded. "I know you're trying," I said, "and that's enough for now." He smiled, fragile but real, and when he walked away, I felt no bitterness, no anger, just peace. That evening, as the sun melted behind the trees and the light turned golden around the edges, I sat on my porch and let the day settle around me. I had lost a life I thought I needed, and found the life I actually deserved. For the first time in decades, my heart felt quiet, still, whole, dignity. I realized is the one inheritance we give ourselves.